Hey, good afternoon, YouTube. Everybody out there, how's it going? We continue to have thunderstorms and rain showers every day for the last few days, with lots of flash flooding around here. But we'll enjoy a little lunchtime here with you. This is going to be a specific topic, so it's not going to be a lunchtime rant or anything. But I've been reviewing things, as I kind of said in my last assessment of the situation. Well, I think it was the last video. But this has to do with what's coming, what to expect, what is really going to go down. And as we most know, or we try to talk about, is the best thing we had to learn from is history. And looking at the situation, now we got Greece and China, economic issues and everything, and it's a global problem. So the ramifications will be global, but what it's going to be like, and I think that's really something really hard for us to comprehend or to understand. And a lot of that is just because we've never experienced it. There's not a lot of practical first-hand knowledge. The depressions was one thing, different events, the stock market crashes, different events. But there's never been one whole cataclysmic thing that we can have to look at, in my view of history, until you go back to the Roman Empire. The collapse of the Roman Empire is probably was, at least in Western thought, the single most, for the people that lived in that area, it affected them greater than probably anything else since then, as far as the depression, I guess you could say, but this way, the effect on society and the effect on the culture and everything, they got wrapped around that whole collapse. It wasn't fully executed until the collapse of Constantinople, in the Eastern Roman Empire, but the Western side collapsed much faster, much more dramatic. And I think the key thing to think is it's not just an economic situation we're looking at. There's been different types of economic collapses. Every culture and country has had a currency crisis or a currency collapse throughout the centuries of where they've used currencies, or an economic situation where economies fall apart based upon lack of trade or whatever. But is it gonna? I don't think it's not gonna be the we like to think of the Rhodes scenario, or the Book of Eli scenario. Wars will have a lot to do with it. I think wars will progressively make it worse, make the situation worse. So it'll be. I think it's just appearing. It's going to be a process over time. It's not going to be one drastic event, which I guess you could say. It looks like it'll be beyond my generation. So my generation will be gone probably before, and it could be 100 years before it fully reaches the bottom and we start to come out of it. And looking at the Roman example, they had to go through the Dark Ages before they came out of that. But the Dark Ages were only in predominantly Western Europe, whereas what I see this coming up now is going to be pretty much the whole world. Parts of South America, parts of Africa, Central Asia won't see the effects as drastically. Everybody else will go down to their level, I guess you would say, as far as economics, culture, literature, education, entertainment, all those things that wrap around a society. We're kind of going to go down to those levels, I think. We being the United States and Western culture, Russia, China, all these places are going to go back down to those standards. I think in a lot of ways, similar to what happened in Rome. When Rome collapsed, Western Europe, lost all those things that, there's no reason. Why would they lose, the ability to have clean sanitation and medical care, things that were on the upswing. But when Rome collapsed, the division and the infighting and the lack of, that structure caused a lot of other things around it to collapse that you wouldn't think of. The the medical care, the progression in the sciences and stuff like that. I think we'll see something very similar. The medical standards will drop. The cultural appearances will obviously the economic situation progress will devolve. So where does that take us? Does that take us back to the 1950s? Does it take us back to the 1880s? Will there still be electrical power generation? Probably be regional. It'll probably be a regional thing. It's not going to be, the big national structure, I think, is the main reason for the collapse anyway, so it has to collapse. So looking at Rome as that example of how Western Europe fell apart during that time, while it didn't affect China at that time and other regions, I think the way this world is structured now, the large majority of the people on the earth will feel the effects, whereas you'll have certain sections that won't, similar to what happened at the collapse of Rome. But as far as today, it's just so everything's so interconnected with technology and the economy that there will have to be effects felt, and it'll bring everybody down a level. So really, we're gonna look at ourselves going back to possibly sectional, more regional awareness. It's not gonna be a worldwide, global consciousness, I guess. It'll get us back down to where people were at, back in the 1900s, thinking more regionally, not things on the other side of the world or on the other side of the world. Communications are probably going to go back to being limited, as far as technology regressing and the ability to sustain satellites, and a lot of that telecommunications network stuff is going to degrade to the point where it can't be sustained. How far away is that? 100 years? Maybe. How long can a satellite stay in orbit? Okay, when do we lose the ability to replace that? That's how you got to look at this, how this is going to devolve. In that process, it's going to be over decades. As satellites become in disrepair, fall back to the Earth, they ain't going to have the ability to replace them. They ain't going to have the sustainment, economy, or willpower to put it back into orbit. So lose that telecommunications ability around the world. Lose that satellite, TV capability, all that other good stuff, satellite phone capability. So a lot of things that are kind of taken for granted in a lot of ways. As much as they were during Rome, a lot, clean water, or whatever, things are going to go away because they're not able to be maintained. So if you lose that telecom network, you lose the economic network. Everything's focused more locally, more regionally. What happens as a result of that? Well, there's probably going to be a fight over resources. What's left, and you're going to have some different powers evolve. I mean, the Vikings came out of the Dark Ages. The trade with China was firmly established coming out of there. Trade with China in the Middle East helped bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. Well, we've already had that, and we regressed from it. I guess the only thing to do would be to reestablish it, right? And there would be a history there potentially to reclaim that. We just always have viewed things from a progress standpoint. Everything's always progressed during our lifetimes, during our grandparents' lifetimes. Things have always progressed at a rapid rate usually. Whereas the Dark Age, hundreds of years, people weren't able to communicate, across countries. People didn't know what was going on the other side. Will we regress that far? I don't know. It's hard to say. I guess it depends on how much damage is done and how much people forget. I mean, obviously at the fall of the Roman Empire, a lot of science and technology was forgotten, was lost. There was progress in medicine that was lost, and things like that. And if we have that same occurrence, you lose that science, then you have things like plagues and other pandemics that could come more, thin the population. You thin the population and you lose a lot of economic viability. You lose the ability to produce things. You lose a lot of knowledge and a lot of brain power. You lose specialization. That's the real key to what has brought us to where we are, the ability to specialize and one specific thing in the economy. Whereas in the old days, you grew your food plus you did anything else in addition. But through specialization, you were able to do your own thing, whatever that might be, smith work or whatever, while somebody else grew all the food. And that evolved over time in specialization. And we're in a real specialized economy. As that gets stripped away and everybody has to rely on them, you have to go back to relying on yourself for a lot of things, where you can barter and trade for some special things. As the population gets thinned out through the lack of specialization, through the lack of doctors, through the lack of knowledge of science and medicine, as population gets thinned out potentially, do we have the creeping back in of lore and folklore, where dark spirits cause sickness instead of microbes and pathogens? Do we lose that knowledge? You would hope not, right? But why did it happen in Europe before? So just some thoughts about where, I guess I don't know if it's rambling or not, but I've just been thinking, trying to get my baseline here again on where we're going, what could be coming, you want to know what to get ready for, right? How bad could it get? I don't think the road scenario is necessarily as bad, how bad it's going to be. I don't think we're going there. I think we're really going to be going in that Western European, but affecting the whole world type of collapse that happened in Rome as being our example of you're going to have factionalism and all these, I guess, empires or republics or states or whatever are going to spring up out of what are current day nations potentially. So your political situations will be a lot different coming out of it. You only hope the one world government's not going to come out of it, because they'd have to have you have to have that worldwide communication, worldwide economy. So that goes back to the other thought of, well, if we don't collapse economically, the one world government progresses. So maybe that's what we're really fighting against. Maybe the collapse is better than the one world government. I think so. Yeah, it almost want to bring about it before they can seize that control. Because once they seize control, it's a lot harder to get back. So there's some thoughts, YouTube. Live free.